Mutiny! So, have content creators actually turned on Wizards of the Coast? Have the Dungeons & Dragons community mutinied against their masters? There has been a ton of content out there talking about how content creators in the D&D community have turned against the owners of Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast. And they did do so in a pretty huge way. But I think for me, the highlight of the Content Creator Summit last week was a moment that I'm really worried about and no one has really talked about at all. In fact, this was a moment at the summit that was met with thunderous applause, and that's how Liberty dies. Thank you, patron Saint George Lucas. Just kidding, I hated the prequels. But what am I talking about? Well, Wizards of the Coast recently invited a ton of content creators to visit their Dungeon Lair HQ. Or was it a volcano island? Either way, it's in Seattle. And they were invited for a summit. And Wizards paid a bunch of these creators for their per DM expenses and even threw in a free dinner and some pirate swag for their trouble. I've been watching a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean lately. Now, this was obviously a PR event, with the intention being that content creators would soak up all the juicy release nuggets about D&D Beyond, the new virtual tabletop, and the death of one D&D, which we're gonna talk about, and then present that to their audiences without any complication. Wizards of the Coast wanted to be clear and let us know that just like that hoot of a psychiatrist that put Seattle on the map, they're listening. It's my first organic Frasier joke. I'm so happy. Though it wasn't all physical for the attendees. There was a digital component too. A lot of creators were invited to a kind of digital live stream of the summit. Alas, I was not invited to either. Probably because of all those drunken messages I left on Chris Cox's answering machine. Though in my defense, who has an answering machine anymore? And it turns out that I missed a pretty big blowout because the content creators invited to the D&D Content Creator Summit really did derail Wizards of the Coast's carefully orchestrated PR event. So, what happened? Well, firstly, instead of simply absorbing and regurgitating Wizards' PR points, the content creator community really grilled Wizards on the future of D&D. In fact, they asked so many questions that Wizards had to delay their entire schedule to set up an impromptu Q&A session. Cup boileth over. And the anger in the community kind of seems to have taken Wizards off guard. Whatsy do seem a little out of touch with the community right now. If I had to sum them up in one miniature, it would be this one. So confused. I suspect that Wizards still don't quite appreciate just what a potato in the punch bowl the OGL scandal was for the community. Many of the creators invited to this summit stood to lose money as a result of the changes that Wizards seemed intent to make to their relationship with third-party creators earlier this year. And there's something about having to face the prospect of having your content vetted by a pencil pusher in a multinational public corporation just because you have the audacity to include a questline more nuanced than kill the evil skeleton in your content that really brings out the bratty attitude in some people. Something tells me that the pleasure palace of the Bethusian demon whore would not exist in such a world.
Pleasure prison of the Bethuvian demon whore.
Demon whores.
And we would all be culturally less for it. The OGL push from Wizards really felt hostile, and boy did content creators let them know that once they got in the same room with Wizards of the Coast. And this strength of ill will in the community towards Wizards should be pretty terrifying for Hasbro Wizard executives because content creators are incredibly integral to selling the game of D&D. In a lot of ways, this Content Creator Summit was intended to form part of a PR campaign designed around placating the community and appeasing creators. But the response of content creators showed that a PR campaign like this might not necessarily work. Wizards need to rebuild the trust with substantial changes. This means keeping their hands out of the forbidden monetization cookie jar. And Hasbro are losing content creators thick and fast. Every day, there are content creators announcing that they just can't support Hasbro anymore. They've already lost a couple of 100k plus subscriber content creators like Bob Worldbuilder and DM Lair, and they're just the latest to move on to other systems. Matt Mercer and Critical Role have announced their own TTRPG. Matt Colville is currently working on his own TTRPG too. Stranger Things is almost over. A lot of doors that have introduced new people to D&D recently are closing. Wizards are losing a ton of free advertising, and that means that content creators are more valuable to Wizards than ever before. So it was really important for Wizards to get this Content Creator Summit right, and I don't think they did. So it started with a presentation on the new D&D virtual tabletop, and then a Q&A where creators could ask questions all about it. We got to see the virtual tabletop in action, and it looks predictably very flashy, but not very customizable, which was kind of exactly my fear. Houses, for example, they're totally prefab and cannot be customized. There's tons of special effects, and miniatures are highly detailed, presumably so that customization can be sold at a later stage. At the virtual tabletop Q&A, creators asked questions of Wizards, and we learned not a lot. Mostly that Wizards genuinely don't really know what's happening with their virtual tabletop. I mean, I'll give you a little summary of the exchange. Thanks for holding this Q&A session explicitly for this topic, Mr. Hasbro. Mr. Hasbro, what can we expect to play on the new Dungeons & Dragons virtual tabletop? You can play anything you want, so long as it's D&D. Do you plan on allowing any other RPGs other than D&D? Maybe one day, if we buy them out. And the graphics looked really nice, but what kind of specs are going to be needed to run this thing? We don't know. Really, there wasn't a lot of new details learned about the virtual tabletop, just that it might run on consoles at some stage. Though this Q&A did then spiral into a larger, impromptu back and forth between creators and Wizards about the larger OGL scandal and Wizards' PR management. During this, there also wasn't a lot learned, though it was a little cathartic to see Wizards squirm. But most of the responses for Wizards were pretty Look, I can't judge the sincerity of their statements, but they were pretty unsubstantial. They promised everything they could without really committing to anything, mostly just reiterating the point that they want to keep receiving feedback. But like, okay. Words are wind. I will say, though, that I don't really see Wizards changing course in terms of their original intentions with the OGL, which was to take control of third parties and take ownership over the entirety of content created for D&D, whether that originated in-house with Wizards or by a third-party publisher. I still think that is their entire goal. They've just had to rethink the methods. They tried the stick with the OGL changes and that didn't work, but I think they might be trying for the carrot now, and that might be working. And the reason I say that is because of the very next topic at the summit. Next up, Wizards talked about D&D Beyond, and this was really the meat of the summit that the Shoreline Sorcerers wanted to talk about with the content creator community. They announced that D&D Beyond is replacing the D&D websites, because D&D Beyond actually gets visitors, which is pretty fair, and also that, drumroll please, they are opening the D&D Beyond marketplace to partners. And this actually went down really well at the summit. There were reports of an enthusiastic hell yeah from the audience, which is a feeling that I do not share in. In fact, I'm the opposite. I really hate this idea. What Wizards are getting at here is that they will platform third-party content on the official website D&D Beyond, and they will sell it. And presumably there'll be some sort of complicated financial arrangement about margins and who takes what percentage of what money, and that would all need to be hashed out. But the core idea of this is something that fills me with dread. Now, I can see why this went down well at the summit, because lots of content creators who were invited to this event are third-party sellers and publishers of D&D content. Their goal is to sell their product to as many people as possible, and a centralized market situated in D&D Beyond, which is what Wizards of the Coast are proposing, helps that. It will make these creators more money and get their content into the hands of way more people. And I'm not saying that that specific element is bad. I'm a huge fan of lots of third-party content and homebrew. But look, I come at these things from the perspective of consumer advocacy. I only care about the type of deal that role players, gamers, and hobbyists will get. I want to see third-party publishers and creators succeed, not because homebrew or third-party content has some intrinsic basic right to exist, but because it means more content for role players. That's kinda all that matters to me. I want to see these creators succeed financially and for their businesses to be sustainable so that we get more fun and awesome and varied content, which we might get as a result of this D&D Beyond third-party partnership. But I also look at this whole deal from the perspective of the wider TTRPG hobby rather than just with the D&D branded blinkers on. And my worry about this is that centralizing a homebrew marketplace on a branded platform for Wizards of the Coast to take a cut of every sale and only allow D&D specific content on it will actually lock people into the D&D brand and encourage role players to not stray further into other games like Pathfinder or World of Darkness, or I don't know, is there a Frasier RPG? I bet it's just a D&D homebrew. Oh, it's not. Well, that's a pleasant surprise. This would be like Valve creating the Steam Game Store but only selling Valve games and Valve game modes. This is how we get monopolies, and Hasbro know all about monopolies. They own it, and D&D already occupies so much of the TTRPG space. I am concerned that the digital future of TTRPGs might look a little more like that Apple ad rather than Cyberpunk, which featured lots of different companies. Future sucks, man. Still, at least Cyberpunk had more than one TV channel and universe. Is this really the best we can hope for now? Oh god! Ah! I'm a little concerned that Hasbro and third-party creators jumping into bed together could lead to a closed marketplace that would put a ton of power into the hands of a major multinational corporation like Hasbro. Even if it's super convenient, I'd rather not have Walmart be the place where I get all of my stuff. This might all seem like a really good idea right now, and it might lead to tons of short-term money into the hands of people who kind of deserve it. But long-term, I think it's got big problems. And this is looking like Wizards' antidote to the OGL controversy. It seems likely that D&D Beyond is going to become the one-stop shop for D&D. And I don't like that future, I'll be honest. Next up, Wizards announced the death of one D&D. RIP 1 D&D 2022 to 2023. Gone too soon, or not soon enough if you believe the critics, which I am one of. Though it's sort of a half-life death because 1 D&D is still happening, but Wizards of the Coast have decided that they're just gonna act like it's not. I know you're confused, I'm confused. I think it's helpful to just think of 1 D&D as the new 5.5 edition. Wizards insist that it's not 5.5, but really it's 5.5. 1 D&D has been scaled down to simply being a revision of the 5th edition core rules, and there's going to be some changes to D&D as a result. There's been a bunch of tweaks to the classes, like Eldritch Blast becoming intrinsic to warlocks rather than a spell. Races are being called species now, which I hate. Species is just way too scientific, and it sounds like something a Victorian doctor would come up with. They should just call the different races folk, in my opinion. It's far more twee and fantasy feeling. Jeremy Crawford referred to half races as inherently racist, which has gotten a lot of buzz online, but I think that that has been totally overblown. This is a super complicated point that I don't want to go into because this video is already way too long, but I think the optics of this has kind of undermined WotC's position here. But it should be noted that half races are staying in the game via the 2014 Player's Handbook. They just won't be included in the new revised rules book. This is important because the 2014 books are still going to be relevant to the new edition because it's a new 5.5 edition. It's D&D 5.5. The 5th edition books are compatible with the 5.5 edition books. You get it? You see it? It's 5.5. Am I losing my marbles here? Am I the only one who this is obviously 5.5? And I gotta say that though I was really worried about the D&D Beyond marketplace, the thing that surprised me most at the Creator Summit was this announcement of the change of name from 1 D&D to just D&D. Wizards are under this strange impression that this is the end of editions in D&D, that it's just D&D forever now. And I've seen some creators like Professor Dungeon Master argue that this is the end of editions with D&D, but I don't think so. This D&D 5.5 or whatever will have some time in the sun, but I think that eventually down the line, a new edition of D&D is inevitable. They're just lying about this. Eventually there will be too many books that will have included too many classes, there will be too many races or species or folka, and and feature creep will have gotten out of hand. And they will have nothing new to put inside books that they can then sell. So they'll need to do a new edition that wipes the slate clean to get everybody back to square one so they can start the sales treadmill again. It's inevitable. They will just need to do a new edition down the line. There's no other way to support a game like this. Unless, you know, their intention is to sell a live service platform that survives through microtransactions, selling dice and cosmetics through Astral Diamonds, some sort of, you know, forbidden currency for the next couple of decades. Oh no. Okay, so this name change to just being called D&D kind of has way bigger implications actually, because if they're not intending on selling new editions, then how else does the game support itself otherwise unless it's just a live service platform forever? Oh, that's not good, because we know where that leads. Check this video out. And a huge thanks to my patrons, especially Sonic Bread and Crypto Kev, and I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye.